Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So we are in a season of busyness right now. I mean, we're always in a season of busyness, but my God, like we're squeezing in this podcast recording in between an appointment this morning and one that's coming out this afternoon. We're in a season of producing we're producing an INTX program for INTJs and INTPs. So we're in the middle of like recording and taking notes and making sure that's a really quality program, and that's coming out in a little bit. So it's just occupying our space and our mindset and all this stuff. And plus we've got other things we're doing. Like we're growing Personality Hacker and we're doing all this stuff. And I think Antonia and I, we've kind of like had these little snippy moments back and forth. I mean, like my sons are here right now visiting for 2 weeks. We have, family obligations. We're going to be traveling next week. It's just a bunch of stuff's happening. And one of the things that we keep doing, we'll keep talking about between Antonia and myself, is this idea of holding space for each other. And we get a lot of like funny comments about this phrase, holding space, because we've talked about it in the past.
And we say it all the time.
Yeah.
It's in like literally every podcast. And to a point where somebody turned it into a drinking game. And they were like, every time Joel and Antonia say hold space, you have to take a shot.
See, there you go.
And I would imagine somebody would be pretty tipsy by the end of one of those podcasts.
I would imagine as well, depending on the podcast. So I guess what we want to talk about today is what does it mean to hold space? What is that? Like, what? Let's just make it a thing. If it's something we talk about all the time, what does that actually mean?
And I guess I make the assumption. Obviously, we've made the assumption that people know what that means, or they'll infer it from the context of how we use it. But I think actually defining what it means to hold space, this is a long time coming. I mean, we're hundreds of podcasts in, so so maybe eventually we'll just go ahead and like define our terms. And I think what's nice about this concept of holding space, I think I even remember somebody you were talking to. I think it's for one of the an INTJ, one of the programs that we have. You were interviewing an INTJ and you said something like hold space. He's like, listen, Joel, an INTJ is never going to say the phrase hold space. Like they just never would. And I was like, that's weird because I picked up that phrase from an INTJ. And that was the first time I heard it. And what's nice about the phrase, in my opinion, is that it encapsulates something that is a very important role that we take on for each other, or we can take on for each other if we have the clarity of mind to do so. And it's basically a sense of responsibility. I think of it as, and I don't know if we've mentioned this concept in other, other podcasts and other, contexts, or, talking about different things, but this idea of securing the perimeter. I don't know if we've talked about that. I can't remember the last time we did, but it's been long enough ago that my memory is not with me. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it and just assume we've never talked about it, or we did so long ago that it's okay to review it.
You're like an old man that just tells his stories no matter who's listening, even if he told them yesterday.
I am that person. I tell stories over and over again, and I have no idea if my audience has heard it or not. So that's pretty common for me. But this idea of securing the perimeter is something I picked up many years ago at a I can't remember what style of event it was. I think it was about mind control, actually, and getting control of your own mind. And the speaker was talking about this idea of animals securing the perimeter for each other. When lions take down a kill, they all, of course, descend upon the poor zebra or caribou or whatever they've taken down. But one lion is tasked with this idea of securing the perimeter. And what they do is they walk around a certain, distance from the kill site where all the other lions are feasting. And they walk around and make sure that they're not going to be attacked by jackals or any other scavenger that might try to get the kill from the lions that just took it down. And the lion walking around the perimeter is doing what's called securing the perimeter. And so they hold a space for the other lions to be able to eat in peace. So they're holding a space for the rest of the pride in order to be able to not have to worry about whatever's going on outside, when they can just nourish themselves. And then, of course, they swap roles. Another lion will do the same thing later. So when we talk about holding space, I think another phrase we could use is secure the perimeter. Create a space for the other person where whatever's going on for them at that moment, whatever needs attending, then they have the time, they have the space to do that. And you secure the perimeter by making sure that any outside interruptions or anything else that would, come in and attack potentially the process that's happening, that you're holding all of that at bay so the person can just rest into the process.
Let me tell you an example of how this is showing up right now for us to give you an illustration of, I think, this phrase or this meaning. So right now, again, we're in this like pressure cooker situation. We've got a lot of things on the table. We've got a lot of things we got to get through, not just business obligations, not just obligations here to the podcast, but family obligations. So there are some things that are coming up for me between myself and Antonia, like not big stuff, like little things that I'm like, hey, I wish we could do this differently. Like the way we interact in our business or whatever, right? Like I want to change a couple ways we do stuff. It might have to be a conversation, and that conversation might trigger some emotional experiences for both of us because the reason we're doing things is we think they're the right way to do stuff, right? In fact, as I'm talking, you don't even know what I'm talking about, Antonia, because you could probably have some inklings of it, but early this morning, I was like kind of stressed out about something. I'm checking my email and something broke on one of the website things. And I'm like, oh, I got to fix this. And you're like, are you okay? I thought you were doing good today. Are you like stressed out? I'm like, look, don't ask me that, because if you ask me how I'm feeling, I'm going to start accessing that part of me. And then we're going to have to like spend an hour, instead of recording this podcast, we're going to be spending an hour talking about like, what's annoying me right now and how we could do things differently. And then it might spiral into like 3 other conversations that have been like stacking. And what I think about holding space, I think about, we've got a lot we're doing right now. I do have some things I want to address on how we're like functioning in the business in relationship to each other, but I'm not bringing, like I'm guarding against bringing that up right now, because I have a sense based on past history, knowing that if we go down that road, we're going to have to, like, there's no screaming or fighting, but we're going to have to like talk about stuff and get into, well, oh, I didn't know you felt that way. I'm so sorry. Like, oh, and then it might be like, well, I didn't do that. And like, be like, there might be stuff that comes from it that I can't predict emotionally.
Yeah.
And it could cause us to go off the rails of things we have to do. And it could cause you to be thrown, Antonia, into your, 10-year-old process of extroverted feeling, that tertiary process. So what I look at it is I say, I can hold space for this situation. I'm going to hold space for my own emotions. I'm not going to bring them up. Yeah, there's stuff that I got right now that I want to talk about, but it's just not the time or place. There's no way for us to have a meaningful, productive solution to any of this. It's just going to put me in an agitated state. And then it's going to spill off to you, and you're going to feel agitated. And now we're not going to get work done. And now we're going to have to, either we'll get the work done and we'll be grudgingly through it the whole time, like, rah, 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 or we will abandon work and spend the rest of the afternoon talking about how we feel about things and how things are going for us and how we can realign stuff, and then we're not getting stuff done. So Either way, I don't see it as a good outcome right now.
So basically, you are securing the perimeter. You're securing my perimeter and our workspace from you. Actually,
pretty much from myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've had to do the same thing. I think this is when we just kind of shelf whatever we're feeling or put a pin in it for later, right? Like, it's not the appropriate time right now to discuss this thing. We could if we wanted to, but it's going to be massively interruptive or disruptive, rather. I guess that's the right word, is disruptive. So it's going to be massively disruptive. So let's not talk about this thing right now. So sometimes we can sort of secure the perimeter and hold that space from ourselves. We're the thing that would be penetrating it. And so, and I think that we do that all the time, for sure. We, like, as people.
Yeah, all of us as people do that. Well, but the challenge is often what happens, though, it's actually not holding space. It's just disregarding or ignoring the problem. So there's a difference here. Holding space is a temporary, like, it's, the lion doesn't have to, he gets to eat too. The guy that's, the lion that's going around securing the perimeter.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that indefinitely. He gets to stop and he gets to have somebody else secure the perimeter, and then he gets to go and eat the kill as well. They take turns, like sentry duty, right? So it's this notion or this idea that holding space is going to be temporary. It's not that you're going to cover over your emotions or things coming up for you or even the other person. Let's say you were really upset right now, Antonia. You're like having a tough time today and you're having upset. And so I'm like holding space. I like suppress, maybe I put off the things I had to do to attend to maybe something that you're having trouble with. Well, I'm holding space for you in that I put my tasks off, but I didn't just disregard those. I'm going to go back to them and get them done, hopefully. And I think the same thing is for emotions or some interpersonal dynamic stuff that's coming up for you in your relationships, friendships, lover relationships, whatever that is, parent-child relationships. You're holding space for the other person, and it's not going to be disregarding it. You're still going to readdress that. It's more asynchronous addressing of emotion than it is suppressing or pushing it off indefinitely.
Well, and protecting whatever needs to be protected in the moment, because there's a rhythm to life. There's times when we have to address certain things and times when we need to be addressing other things. It's when we become one-trick ponies, right? Like we always want to be talking about the thing that we want to be talking about or addressing the thing we want to be addressing, that we get kind of self-indulgent. So it's a matter of securing the perimeter for whatever is the appropriate thing to be going on in that moment. And sometimes, sometimes we're protecting, like you just described a secondary version of holding space for, like for me, which is attending to my emotional stuff and protecting that space against tasks. That would be the disruptor. In the previous situation, it was tasks that needed to be done, and you were protecting the tasks from the disruption of emotions. So it's really about creating that. It's about creating and holding that space, creating the space for whatever needs to be done at the time, and then making sure that it's secure. And like you said, one person can't just be doing that all the time. If there's only one line that's ever, securing the perimeter, then that line will eventually die of starvation. So you do have to take turns. You have to allow one person to, swap out, like you said, sentinels. And then when the one person gets swapped out, then the other person now gets their nourishment. And I think that's the important thing. If you're only ever holding space for somebody else perpetually, then think of yourself as going malnourished.
And I'm sure there's, you might be listening right now saying, oh, that's me. In my family or in my relationship or with my kids, I'm the one that's always holding the emotional space. Like I'm the one that has to do it all the time. And, you guys make a good point. Like I keep thinking we'll revisit certain issues. My lover, spouse, child, friend, whatever keeps saying, oh, I can't deal with this right now. So I hold space, but it's never revisited. So I feel awful. Things are stacking for me. It keeps festering in my heart, in my mind, and I feel stuck. Well, I think that's probably where you got to figure out how to schedule addressing this. I mean, if I was listening to this podcast, I'd be like, come on, guys. Like, really? You're going to talk about holding space? Like, what are you, insulting my intelligence? Like, I'm a grown adult listening to this podcast, and you're talking to me about how to not, like, get into emotional space when I've got work to do. Like, I go to work. I don't have to, like, sit around and talk to my spouse all day about our personal issues. Like, I can go to work. I'm not a child. And yet, I walk through the world. And again, I'm not saying you listening have struggled with this. I just walk through the world and I see a lot of people have a lot of issues with a lot of other people. Like there's a lot of human conflict going on around me. And most of it I can just look at and go, look, if you just give 30 minutes here of space holding, this could be 10 times better.
I mean, I see a lot of that conflict happening too. I think some of it happens because we feel like we're providing that service for others perpetually and it never happens for us. But I think that we don't always announce it. Like you and I announce it. That's one of the things that we've taken to do in our relationship, because then we can see when the other person feels like they have a moment right now where they feel like they're providing that service for us. And so we realize that it's probably taking an energetic hit for them. Like when I say, I'm like holding space for you right now, it's not that I'm necessarily trying to indicate that you're taking from me, but rather that I am in the position right now to be able to attend to your stuff, and I'll go ahead and keep sentinel or guard. And then you do the same thing for me. You let me know when you're in that position as well. And so I think we announce it, and then we reference it a lot. Obviously we do. It's like in our lexicon, we talk about it on the podcast all the time, holding space for things. So we're just like really aware of this concept. And I think it's because it's a basic microtransaction, I think, that we're doing for each other all the time. Like we kind of do this for each other all the time. But when it goes unnoticed, then we can get into that more sort of, I don't want to call it a victim-y stance, but it's a stance where I'm always on the receiving. I'm always the person who's providing the service and nobody's providing the service for me. Well, how would you know if they weren't addressing or they weren't announcing it?
Yeah, I think announcing it is good, talking about it. In fact, let's jump into some actual thoughts on this. I want to just go through a quick little list that I jotted down around holding space. And it was actually extroverting or talking about it as one of the things I have here. I'll get to it in a second. But when we're holding space, mostly what we're doing, from my perspective, is we're trying to get a hold of or get control over the assumptions, the motivations, and the emotions coming up either on our side or someone else's side in the midst of a dynamic that's going on. So we're jumping to assumptions about the person or motivations, like what's motivating them? Why would they be doing that? Or maybe we have just raw emotions coming up altogether. Like if you don't do something with me this morning around something work related, well, your motivation is you don't love me, or you're angry with me, or you're trying to teach me a lesson. I have all these things that could come up for me of why you might be doing this. So getting control over those emotions, motivations, and assumptions is key. And I think that's really what you're doing in a holding space environment, first and foremost.
Yeah. Again, it's almost like you're protecting the person from yourself. You're giving them a space where they can be radically honest or go through a process that might be kind of offensive to you. Like if you're in a pair bond relationship, your spouse will say all sorts of things while they're going through a process that will be very offensive and hurtful. And you can take it personally and think they're talking about you. But if you are really securing the perimeter for them in those moments, then you won't. You are making sure that you're not the disruptor in that situation.
One of the ways to shift your perspective to secure that perimeter, because it's really key, is to see, and we've talked about this in past relationship podcasts, and we talked about in the context of a lover relationship, two people that are in love with each other, romantic love. But this is the same case for parent-child, for lover, for friends. I don't care what the coworkers, I don't care what the dynamic is. Treat the relationship itself as a separate entity. So you've got, person A, person B, and then the two people in relationship to each other is almost like a third person. Like it creates a new dynamic, a new entity. And if you're a systems thinker, if you've really followed along in how we talk about systems thinking really applies to everything. And seeing the relationship between two people or multiple people as an entity or a node in a system of itself helps you see, there's more at play here than just my feelings. There's more at play here than just the other person's feelings. There's the dynamic between the two of us as well that I have to take into account. So this is a much more sophisticated way of looking at relationships. And we secure the parameter. You're not just necessarily securing the parameter for yourself or the other person. You're also securing the parameter for the relationship itself. Like the relationship needs secured as well. So like, as an example, Antonia and I may be in a disagreement. She's got strong emotions. I have strong emotions. And there's an entity here, which is the relationship that we've entered into. We're in love, we're lovers, we're also married, we're also business partners, we're also co-parents. There's tons of different types of dynamics of relationship. But ultimately, there's a relationship that we have. And if stuff's coming up and I'm starting to say something maybe hurtful, I'm trying to express my emotions, but I'm also damaging not only Antonia potentially, saying something hurtful, but I'm damaging the third entity, which is the relationship itself. And so that's something that I think we can take into account as humans in securing the parameter, holding space. It's not just the person you're holding space for. It's the dynamic between you two. So I think that's a key little shift in thinking that will help you when you're going down this road. So a systems approach to this.
And in what you just mentioned in that dynamic, you mentioned like something you could say to me that could hurt me or hurt the relationship. And it almost kind of feels like you're suggesting not to do that. But I think when we talk about holding space for each other, really what it is checking to see if the other person has the ability to do that, to provide that service for you in that moment. And if they don't, then just sharing your authentic feelings could create some collateral damage. And when you get really good at holding space for each other or for your other, for your spouse, then they can go ahead and do that. They can talk about what's going on for them, and the other person doesn't take it personally. It's kind of the point of holding space, is that you create a context where the other person is now free to be able to articulate whatever they need to articulate in as authentic a way as possible, and you're not going to hold it against them or weaponize it later. So I think that's it's important to be able to gauge whether or not your partner or your friend or your family member or whoever you're in the relationship with at that moment, it's important to gauge whether or not they're in a time period, because sometimes it's not a matter of skill. Sometimes it's just chronology. What kind of day did they have? Is this the moment to talk about it? So I think that's more obvious relationship, dynamics or, understanding relationships. But I think that's one of the things that we have when we have a need going unmet inside of ourselves. sometimes we're not as sensitive to whether or not the other person can hold space. And sometimes just asking them if they can will get them into a place where they can now secure the perimeter.
A couple of thoughts on this as we, begin to wrap up for this podcast is, we're talking about this in the context of emotions, and often holding space for other people can be emotional. But I've learned in my relationship with you, Antonia, and other people that I'm friends with, it's not always emotional. Sometimes it's holding space for the thoughts the person has or the circumstance that's emerging. We have friends over often that don't have children, and they hold space for us in our lives because we've got kids, right? So they kind of hold space for the circumstance they're in certain ways. Or maybe thoughts. Like I've had to hold space for radical thoughts other people have had. They have these wildly differing political or social opinions. And I'm like, I just can't see it that way, but I'm going to hold space because I want to be in a relationship with you in some way as a friend. I can't really see the way you're coming at this, but I'm going to hold space for the relationship and allow you to express yourself in your authentic way inside this dynamic. It's going to be okay. I'm not going to take it personal, and I'm not going to get triggered by this thought. And what's great about this is as we begin to discipline ourselves and work on holding space for people in our personal lives, because that's where the work has to be done. That's where the wax on, wax off happens, right? That's where the training wheels happen, is in your lover relationship, your parent-child relationships, your friendships. That starts to translate to the world and culture in a bigger way. So we see right now at the time of this recording in the United States, there's, certain people get invited to a college campus, and then students will riot in the streets and throw grenade bombs and all this crazy stuff, like rioting. It doesn't really matter the political persuasion, just this is what's happening, right? Obviously, no one's able to hold space for opposing thoughts right now. Free speech is a little bit under attack because we can't even hold space for people that have different, this isn't even emotional. I mean, it's getting emotional, but these are just thoughts people are putting forward that we can't hold space for. So I think this discipline, this training wheel we get in this, on a micro level with our relationships, helps us translate that into the broader culture, the broader world. And if we're going to affect the change we want to affect, this is the kind of stuff on a daily basis we've got to get good at. We've got to start focusing on, how do I treat the person I'm in love with, them as a person? How do I create my relationships as third entities and see those as spaces to play inside of and hold space inside of? Because this is real life, and real games are being played outside of our relationships that we've got to show up as the best people possible.
Yeah, well, and then ultimately it goes back to the thing that it always goes back to, which is, how are you treating yourself? And are you holding space for yourself? Are you giving yourself an ability to be radically honest internally and do that, without having, without self-judgment? Without going, without doing all that stuff that you hope that your spouse does for you, are you practicing doing that for yourself? And if you can't hold space for yourself, you can't hold space for your intimate relationships, and you're not going to be able to hold space for, other people in the world just kind of floating around. Yeah. So it really starts with yourself, being able to hold space for your own emotions and thoughts. So 2 quick little, techniques. We've already talked about one of them, was extroverting the thing that's happening. I think one of the things in my life, and again, we don't mean be extroverted. We mean talk out what's going on for you, maybe emotionally, in your thought process, in your relationship dynamic. Get it out into the world so you can deal with it. Talk about it. Get it out there so the person knows what's going on for you. And try to do it in the least emotionally charged way possible if you can, because then you can actually do something about it. I know that's tough, but get it out of yourself. That's one idea. The other thing is, slow everything way down. Speed kills, especially in relationships and dynamics with people. So often what holding space means is just slowing the process down. It just means and we know this, right? If you're in the middle of getting angry, count to 10 or walk out of the room and come back. These kind of things. But I'm talking about even beyond just in your emotionally charged state. I'm talking about all of the things. If somebody gives you a thought, you're instantly rejecting. Holding space means, I'm just going to slow down. Let me really, truly try to understand this opposing thought that I'm starting to feel myself get triggered around. I need to hold space for my own emotions here, because, you're holding space for yourself, and you say, I need to understand more. Is this really what this person, go back to that whole thing about assumptions, motivations, and emotions. Is this what this person's really trying to communicate? What I'm getting from this? Is this what's going on? So you're slowing the process down, which gives you enough room to maneuver, to be able to play with different ideas, to be able to absorb and really understand.
And that's again, speed kills. If you can slow things down, if you can extrovert them, get them out, and if you can be focused on relationships themselves or third entities, I think these three things swirling around together can help you on a micro level begin to move down the road of holding space for other people. So this is basically what we're talking about when we talk about holding space. So I don't know how many times people had to take a shot in this podcast, but I'm guessing it's been a lot.
We should just call this the alcohol poisoning podcast. Many people were hospitalized after this podcast. If you're really serious about the hold space drinking game, if you're really serious about it, only those of you who are determined. But now you're dead. So
hopefully you're listening with your friends on like a Saturday night or something, and you didn't have to get up for work the next day,
or at work.
Hopefully you're not driving when you're listening to this, or at work. Yeah, exactly.
But again, if you actually are serious about the game, you're dead now. So all the serious people are dead.
All right. Well, those are our thoughts on holding space, but we want to hear from you. Like, you've been listening. What techniques, what tools, how do you think about this? How have you shown up in a great way? I'd love to hear positive stories, or maybe some struggles that you've overcome, or maybe some struggles you're in. It doesn't really matter. Questions, comments, come over to personalityhacker.com. Leave a question or a comment directly below the show. Let's get a conversation going around this topic of holding space, because I believe it's, again, training wheels for the big stuff that we're all going to be called upon to change the world as these things come down the pike. So let's get on this. Let's have a conversation. Go over to personalityhacker.com. You can also join our community of like minds over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It helps us out a lot.
Hold space. Had to get one more in there.
No, Joel, everybody's dead.
My name is Joel Markwitt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.